Hello everybody and welcome back. As always, I am Mateo311 and this is your channel for everything VR related. Today, we're going to be discussing the perfect VR game. Now, in truth, nothing is ever truly perfect, and a lot of aspects of gaming are subjective, plus there's whole genres that people just don't want to play. So when it comes to discussing something that's perfect, we're going to have a little leeway here. But there are plenty of do's and don'ts when it comes to VR gaming, and it differs a lot from traditional flat screen gaming. And that's the topic we're going to discuss. So developers, listen up, and if you are a gamer, please let me know when you agree or disagree with my assessment. Now, there are plenty of examples throughout this video, so it is inadvertently a best of list. So if you're looking for some new games, this video is also going to help you out. Now, there are, of course, the links and timestamps if you want to skip ahead, but before we jump in, this video is brought to you by the free-to-play VR hero shooter X8. X8's available on both PCVR and the Quest, and if you're looking for a different type of shooter that plays a bit like Counter-Strike meets Overwatch, then X8 should be right up your alley. The developers have been making constant updates since its release, and if you want to check it out, there is a link down in my description, which will help support this channel. Okay, so let's start off with the first issue that plagues VR games, and that's their pacing. Now, a flat screen title that wants to introduce you to a deep narrative has the luxury of giving you a lengthy cutscene. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work in VR because just standing around and watching something unfold, especially if it's on a flat screen, is just not fun and is way more boring than you would expect, even if the content is engaging. Now, you can go this route, but you have to make sure the entire world is visually immersive. There's things for the player to look around at, things unfolding. It's not just some static event where you're just standing there waiting for the game to actually go. I actually love lengthy, over-the-top, high production value cutscenes in games like God of War, but I'm sitting back on my couch just taking it in and enjoying it. It doesn't have the same impact in VR. Just something about standing around makes it so much more dull. So you really should start a VR title by getting your players into the action rather quickly. But if you do want to go the scenic cutscene route, there is one method that truly works, and we see it in games like Farpoint, The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, and Horizon Call of the Mountain. All three of these games have something in common. They start with you on a moving vehicle with a lot going around in the background, as there's either some narration or player characters explaining some of the storyline. Now, other highly successful games like Space Pirate Trainer or Beat Saber just throw you right in and go, it's a game, play, have fun, get right into the action. And that's another great method for VR. And Half-Life Alyx does something uniquely special because why wouldn't it? It both gives you a highly immersive world with things to look around at, but also a lot for the player to engage in. So you get in, you see things going on in this amazingly beautiful city, but at the same time you could pick up objects right on the walls, get a feel for the physics. So you're getting the mechanics right away and the immersion. It's a win-win. Now, there are some VR games that aren't necessarily bad, but are absolutely terrible when it comes to their pacing, or at least their initial pacing. And a couple examples would be Propagation Paradise Hotel, which again is a cool game, but they start you off where you're frozen, you can't move around, they give you a bit of narration, and then it's a scavenger hunt to pick up pictures and get a little bit more of the storyline. It's just not a great way to introduce you to a game, and you end up waiting like 20 or so minutes for any type of action. Another perfect example is Wraith: The Oblivion Afterlife, which is a dark horror themed storyline, but you spend the first 15 minutes or so just listening to people talk, and you're bored before the game really starts. Now, when it comes to tutorials, don't give us some lengthy example that takes 10 minutes. It breaks the immersion and ultimately just bores us. A perfect example is Lone Echo. The controls are not that difficult in this game, but the title has an excessively long tutorial sequence. I know people who abandoned the entire game because of how long that tutorial was, and another perfect example there would be Legendary Tales. Developers have edited down that intro tutorial, but it was extremely lengthy, and I know it turned people off from the game altogether. Let your players learn by doing, and just add some pop-up reminders like Half-Life Alyx does. Now, moving on to the next biggest aspect of VR games, and that's how does it feel to play. Now, this isn't exactly unique to a VR title. You may hear someone talk about a flat screen game and say, well, how does it feel? And that's more common with things like a fighting title like Mortal Kombat. Does it feel good? Is it responsive? Etc, etc. But in VR, that is taken to the next level and a huge aspect of immersion, and could actually be the best aspect of the title itself. Physically immersive combat is something you really can't get anywhere else, and is one of the best attributes of a high quality VR game. The problem here is if you don't nail the feedback sensation, you can completely ruin your title. There's almost nothing worse than a VR game with poorly implemented physics, an inability to throw items, or objects that you clip through. It's better to exclude these options than implement them poorly. Now when it comes down to games that nail the feel, we have The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, Boneworks, Blade and Sorcery, Thrill of the Fight, and even Beat Saber. Killing zombies in The Walking Dead is just so satisfying. We all know how entertaining the physics are in Boneworks and Bone Labs. And obviously games like Blade and Sorcery, Thrill of the Fight, and Beat Saber are highly addictive. Now some examples of poorly implemented physics include Everslot Invasion and Skyrim. It's surprising that in 2023 we got a melee game with wiggle physics. You just kind of jiggle your weapon around in the air, collision doesn't matter, and it doesn't feel good at all. And the same exact goes for Skyrim VR, which I can forgive more because 1, it's a port, and 2, there's mods to fix that. So whatever the major mechanic in your game is, if it's shooting a gun, swinging a sword, or even just swinging around the world, you have to make sure it feels good. Now performance is another serious issue for VR games. Now this again varies from traditional flat screen titles, because sometimes we'll hear a next gen game is coming out, and it's only going to be 30 FPS, which is a big scandal. But if something like that happens in VR, it's a one-way ticket to Vomitville. That's right, low frame rates can literally make you sick, and on the opposite side of that, when the frame rate is much higher, the game just feels a lot more realistic. Now I know the Quest takes a lot of heat for having poor graphics, but trust me, it's better to have lower quality graphics than a VR title that runs like crap. Now there is a bit of a catch-22 here, because obviously people want the best graphics, but they also want the best performance, and those two battle each other. And obviously optimization is key, which I don't need to spend a lot of time on because I think every VR developer knows this right now, especially those working with the Quest. But this is a great segue into our next topic, which is those graphics. When it comes to VR graphics, realism is not the end-all be-all. We shouldn't be trying to match what we get on consoles. What we should be focusing on is immersion and style. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, that means make sure your game looks good in VR. And that could be the cartoony cell shading angle, which actually works really well. It could be highly immersive and realistic, something like Half-Life Alyx, if you can pull it off. The biggest aspect here is make sure the game remains immersive. Things like an excessive usage of foveated rendering, low resolution textures, texture popping, or poor animations will truly ruin the VR presence. VR is about transporting you to a new world, and nothing will pull you out faster than these issues. Additionally, if you're going for the high quality graphics route, you have to make sure to avoid the uncanny valley. You're much closer to characters in a VR game than you are in a traditional flat title, so if they happen to make an odd face, it just looks a bit goofy on flat screen, but in VR it actually feels a bit creepy. There's plenty of great examples when it comes to high quality VR graphics, and that includes games like Red Matter 2, Half-Life Alyx, Boneworks, again Saints and Sinners, and Hubris. Now there are some other games that don't scream high quality graphics, but they work really well, and that includes other titles like Superhot, Space Pirate Trainer, Pistol Whip, and Beat Saber. They all sell you a unique VR world, and it remains immersive throughout the entire time. Now finally, we're moving into an area that's a bit harder to resolve for VR games, and that's the replayability and overall value. We all know that VR games tend to be quite short, little replay value, and people are complaining, why would I spend $30 or $40 for a title like this that's 5, 6, 7 hours long? Now, I understand that as a consumer, but VR development's a lot harder than traditional development, and this has been a big struggle for a long time in the VR industry. Now, many developers are currently tackling this by almost going the live service route. They're just continually updating their game and giving players a reason to jump back in. Another common route is the roguelike. This genre almost artificially inflates its gameplay time by being extremely difficult and forcing you to replay content. Now, I'm definitely not talking down about this genre because I do absolutely love games like Synapse and Until You Fall, but for some people, it's just not enough overall content. Now, there's no real solution here because VR budgets still remain quite small compared to traditional games. Now, my only recommendation is you pick a side and go one way or the other. It's quantity over quality. Give us something like Moss or Half-Life Alyx, where the attention to detail is just extremely high, and overall it's just like a great experience but not super lengthy. Or you could just aim for maximum replayability, something that's fun to play repeatedly time and time again like Beat Saber, or in terms of like multiplayer games, we have After the Fall, or many of those roguelites out there, Population 1, a couple other good examples. As much as I enjoyed a game like Superhot, you have to admit the value isn't really there. It's unique, it's extremely fun, but you'll probably get through it in like 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours, and unless you really love it, there's no reason to go back. Now, I actually wanted to finish this video by defending VR games. I know they get a lot of crap for poor graphics, lack of mechanics, short gameplay, etc., etc. And again, I mentioned it already, the budgets for VR games are smaller than traditional flat screen games because of the much smaller player base. But on top of that, it's harder to develop in VR. Developers are still learning. They have to do a lot of extra optimization. A lot of times it feels like they're recreating the wheel when it comes to things like physics and interactions. Now that's improving over time. That's moving along. So the game quality is going up. There are hardware limitations. Now, obviously, people don't want to spend $1,000 on a VR headset and a gaming PC. So most people are on Quest, which is basically a cell phone attached to your face. So there are also hardware limitations, which are improving over time. So all of these, factors play in. But right now, the majority of the developers in the scene are extremely passionate. They're working really hard. They're solving solutions day after day. I just wish all that collected knowledge from everyone could be slapped together. It would really progress VR forward. And then we also have, competing companies. We have Sony, we have Meta. PCVR is kind of, does it exist anymore? Not really. No one's developing exclusively for PCVR because there's no money to be made. So, there's a lot of reasons why VR might not be at the level you want it to be. But you have to admit, it gives you an experience that you cannot get anywhere else. And that's just going to get better over time. VR is still growing, guys. I'm loving it. I hope you guys are too. I'd love to hear your feedback on this video. I thought this was a cool topic. This is another one of my rambly type of videos where I, try to get us all to think about what's going on in the world of VR. I hope you like them. If you do, thumbs up. If you're new here, consider subscribing. And as always, I'll see you guys on next time.